So now that we added the Google Fonts package and we changed some fonts here, it's now time to make sure that as we navigate through these questions, we also save the answers that were chosen by the user so that we can then later use them on the results screen. And of course, we should make sure that we stop once we run out of questions so that we don't see this error here. Instead, it is indeed, in this case here, that we ran out of questions, that we exhausted all questions, where we want to show the results screen instead of trying to load the next question. So therefore, we have two main things to do. We must store the selected answers, and we must make sure that we show a different screen once we went through all the answers. And the question is, how do we do that? Well, we got our questions screen widget here with its state class. And in there we have this answer question function, which is executed whenever we click one of our answer buttons. Here we connect this button to the answer question. Now here we then increment the current question index, but it's in the end also here where we should store the selected answers and make sure that we don't continue incrementing this question index until we run out of questions. And therefore, I'd say it's the quiz.dart file with its quiz widget and the quiz state that is important for us here. Because for one, in here, we manage which screen is currently shown. And therefore, that should also be the class where we make sure that the result screen, which we have yet to add, is shown once we're done. And this also should be the place where we store the selected answers, because it's the quiz state class that has access to both the questions screen, which is where the questions and answers are presented, and soon also to the results screen, which is where the selected answers will be needed. So we should lift state up and manage the selected answers state in this quiz state class, since this state class here has access to the screen that generates the answers and soon also to the screen that needs the answers. So therefore here, it makes sense to add a new piece of state, a new variable to this state class here. And this variable here can be named selected answers. And this should be a list of the answers that have been chosen by the user. And the first answer that's about to be added to this list should be the answer chosen for the first question. The second item that's added to this list should be the answer that was chosen for the second question, and so on. Now, therefore, of course, we want to make sure that here we have a list of string values. Hence, we should explicitly set selected answers to that type, so that this here will be an empty list initially, but will be a list of strings once we start adding elements to that list, which we'll do soon. And we can also set this to be a final variable, because indeed I don't plan on reassigning this variable. Instead, I plan on adding elements to the existing list. And as mentioned a couple of lectures ago, that is indeed something you can do with lists and objects. You can manipulate them in memory. Final only complains if you try to assign a new value to this variable, which I won't do. I will just edit the existing value in memory. But of course, initially here, it's empty, and we therefore must now add a method to this quiz state class that is able to add answers to the selected answers list. And for that here, we can add another new method to this quiz state class, which could be named chooseAnswer. The name is up to you, but here I expect to get the selected answer, which should be of type string. And then inside of this function body, I want to update my selected answers here. And for that, we can reach out to the selected answers variable here and call the add method on that. Now that's another built-in method, which is available by default in Dart on all lists. And add does what the name implies. It adds a new item to the list without reassigning that variable. Instead, it reaches out to that list object in memory and adds a new item to that object. which is why we can do it despite this being final, because we're not reassigning the variable, we're just editing the existing list in memory. And here it's the answer, which I want to add to selected answers. So now with that, we have a way of storing those selected answers. But of course, now we must find a way of ensuring that choose_answer gets executed whenever an answer gets picked in the question screen widget. Well, and to achieve this, we have to do what we did before in this course already. We have to pass choose_answer as a value to questions screen. So here we can use choose_answer by its name without parentheses to pass a pointer to that function to questions screen. And in questions screen, we now must accept this function. For that here, in the questions screen widget, and that's important, we're now in the widget class, not in the state class. So in this widget here, you can add a new final variable of type void function that actually now does take an argument, an answer of type string. And you can name this function variable here onSelectAnswer. This name is up to you, but I'm using this way of naming it on something to make it clear that this in the end is a function that's triggered upon a certain event. I'm using this because here I also want to use a named argument again, and therefore here I can set this named argument like this, required this onSelectAnswer. And using this on naming here simply makes it a bit clearer that here a function should be passed in as a value without having to look at the type, because for all these built-in widgets, like these buttons, Flutter also uses this convention of naming the arguments that want functions on something. And that's why I'm also doing this myself here for this named argument where I want a function. And I want a function of this type. A function that returns nothing, but that takes one positional argument, which is of type string. So here in QuizDart, I now have to pass choose_answer as a value for this named argument. So here we can now set this onSelectAnswer argument, which we just added, and set this equal to choose_answer. Now we have to get rid of const here, because that's not supported anymore. But with that, we're forwarding this function here, which is defined in quiz state, to questions screen. Now in questions screen, we now have the problem, though, that onSelectAnswer is available in this question screen widget class, but we actually need it in the state class. Because since this is a stateful widget, it's split out across two classes, as you learned. So how can we get hold of a property that belongs to the widget class inside of this state class? Because it is in the end here in this answer question method inside of question screen state where I want to execute onSelectAnswer. Well, for that, Flutter gives you a special widget property which you can use in this state class. So in that class that extends state. This instance variable called widget, so this property called widget, is provided by Flutter. It's built into this state class, and you can therefore also use it in your class that extends the state class. And this will give you access to the widget class and its properties. So for example, to onSelectAnswer here. And therefore here inside of answer question, besides updating the question index, we can now call widget onSelectAnswer here and pass our answer to this method. Now for that, of course, we need to find out what our answer is. And for that, answer question in here should also accept this selected answer so that we can then forward it to onSelectAnswer. And therefore, in the end, to this choose_answer method here in the quiz widget, in the quiz state class of that quiz widget. So we have a chain of functions here that need to work together to make sure that the selected answer is passed to the topmost widget that needs it when one of these answer buttons was clicked. Now at the moment, answer question doesn't get this string here though. We want to get a string here, but in the place where we're using answer question, it won't get this string. Because onTap on the answer button actually wants a function that gets no argument. And answer question now does get an argument. So here in this place, to make sure that we do pass a string value to answer question, we should actually replace this pointer at answer question here with an anonymous function that's instead passed as a value to onTap. And in here, we do indeed have access to the answer for which this answer button was rendered. Because keep in mind, we're going through all the answers here, and then we're creating one answer button per answer. That is what map does here in the end, as you learned. So therefore here, we have access to the answer for which this button is created. And in this anonymous function, which is created on the fly here, as part of creating this answer button, so to say, we can therefore call answer question and pass the answer here to answer question. And this will be different for every button. So it will be just the answer that belongs to the button when that button is created as part of this map function. So we make sure that it's really the right answer that belongs to a selected button when a button is clicked. Now this might look like we are now again executing a function immediately, when before we actually passed a pointer at a function here as a value to onTap, but that's not what we're doing here. Instead, we're creating this anonymous function on the fly here, and it's this anonymous function that is forwarded as a value to onTap. And that function body inside of this anonymous function will only be executed when that anonymous function is triggered from inside answer button. So the code here inside this anonymous function does not execute immediately when this button is created, but only when this anonymous function is triggered from inside the button, which here will only be the case when this elevated button is tapped. So at that point of time when that button is tapped, answer question will be called, and the answer of the button that was tapped will be passed as a value to answer question. And in there, we then kind of forward it to the parent widget of the questions screen by executing onSelectAnswer, which was this function we receive as an argument in the questions screen widget. And that in turn is this chooseAnswer function here, because that is what we're passing as a value for onSelectAnswer to questions screen. Now this combination of widget and chain of function calls can be confusing at first, but in the end we're just passing functions as values around, ensuring that we're executing the right function in the right place, and we can still pass data between those different levels of widgets. And with that, with every question that we answer, we'll add a new answer to this selected answers list here.